Skull shape tells us. Cephalic index. What is it about skull shape that informs us about the climate to which the possessor was indigenous? We need to understand that the purpose of the skull is to protect the brain. One of the crucial ways in which it does this is by regulating its temperature. In hot places, the primary objective is to allow the skull to lose heat. In cold places, it is to retain heat. People indigenous to hot places tend to have smaller, more elongated skulls because oblong shapes lose heat better than round ones. People indigenous to cold places tend to have larger, rounder skulls because these retain heat better. These expectations are based on the rules of Allen and Bergman. Cephalic index equals maximum breadth of skull divided by maximum length times 100. Narrower skulls, in relation to their length, are called dolichocephalic. Wider ones are called brachycephalic, and those that are intermediate are called mesocephalic. According to Bergman's rule, the first tend to be found in warmer climates and the second in colder climates. Not everyone in a warm population is dolichocephalic. Within a population there is considerable variety of cephalic index. An example is amongst the Howells database sample of the first 30 male Norwegian skulls. The range is from 70.3, very dolichocephalic, and 82.1, quite brachycephalic. This is greater than the difference between the average Norwegian male index, 74.8, and average Zulu or Dogon male index, 72.7 and 77.2. Like we said earlier, it is about dominating trends, not absolute types. This is what is meant by there is no such thing as race. It is not intended to prevent us from learning about the physical appearance of skeletal individuals and populations. The average index for the population, however, tends to follow climatic patterns, although there is some overlap. Part of the overlap is explained by the role humidity plays in influencing the shape of the skull. Lower humidity has the same effect as high temperatures, hence the most dolichocephalic skulls are found in places of dry heat, while the most brachycephalic skulls are found in places of wet cold. If a dolichocephalic group is found in Europe, it would probably be located in a dry cold zone and would display a moderate form. If a brachycephalic group is to be found in Africa, it would probably be in a wet heat zone and would display a moderate form. A study published in 2009 used 33 measurements from skull samples of populations native to every climatic and geographic zone to see which ones had stronger correlations with temperature and humidity. They produced a table showing that the strongest correlations were with bioauricular breath, maximum cranial breadth, and bizygomatic breadth, in that order. Climate Signatures and the Morphological Differentiation of Worldwide Modern Human Populations by Mark Hube, Suneko Hanahara, and Katerina Harvati in the Anatomical Record 292, 2009, Table 4, page 1724. Let us look at the cephalic index, maximum skull breadth, and bioauricular breadth of skulls from ancient Judah and compare them to populations from around the world. In the process, we shall see which measurements are better at distinguishing warm-adapted and cold-adapted skull samples. Skulls from Judea. The skulls from Judah, southern Israel, come from the settlements of Lachish and En-Gedi. Lachish was an important city in ancient Israel, and its skulls are thought to date back to the Iron Age, around 700 BC. Measurements of Lachish skulls are taken from data in Analysis of Crania from Tel Dewar using multiple discriminant functions by S.O.Y. Chieta, American Journal of Physical Anthropology, AJPA, 75, 1988, pages 375 through 390. Other skulls were from Safed, a small town in Galilee, northern Israel. The measurements are from Tel El-Hesi, Lachish by William Matthew Flinders Petrie, Cambridge University Press, 2013, reprint of early 20th century work, page 34. Skulls from the desert village of En-Gedi date back to Hellenistic and Roman periods, 300 to 66 BC, 50 BC to 100 AD. The measurements of male crania from Hellenistic and Roman En-Gedi are from a team of Israeli forensic anthropologists who published the paper Skeletal Remains of Jews from the Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine Periods of Israel 1, Metric Analysis, by B. Ahrensberg, M.S. Goldstein, H. Nathan, and Y. Rack in Bulletins et Mémoires de la Société d'Anthropologie de Paris, 7, 1980a, page 178 through 80. All measurements, unless specified, are the first 30 males from the Howell's worldwide database populations. It is in Microsoft Excel format, and our figures can be cross-checked in a matter of seconds. The following table is cephalic index, comparing population of males, 30 skulls, unless stated, with cephalic index. Tieta, Kenya, 70.5. Zulu, South African, 72.7. Dogon, Malian, 77.2. Norse, Norwegian, 74.8. Zalivar, Hungarian, 76.2. Berg, Austrian, 82.4. Gizeh, 26 to 30th Dynasty, Egyptian, 74.7. Lachish, 700 BC, Judah, 61, 74.5. Hellenistic period Judean, 35, 78.1. Roman period Judean, 25, 79.1. This was a table of cephalic indices of sub-Saharan African and European male population samples of 30 skulls from the Howell's database. Table 1 illustrates that while cephalic index does indicate which populations are warm-adapted and which are cold-adapted, it does not determine. An example is that the Norwegians have a lower, more warm-adapted cephalic index than the Dogon. We nonetheless note that the Lachish skulls are within the sub-Saharan range. It indicates that they are warm-adapted. Maximum skull breadth. When we only use maximum skull breadth, the overlap vanishes, and we have a more efficient distinguisher, as seen in Table 2. Like all measurements, skull breadth shows plenty of variety within a population sample. In fact, the range in the first 30 individual Norwegian male skulls, 131 through 145, of the Howell's database is greater than the difference between the average Norwegian measurement, 140.3, and the average Zulu measurement, 135.3. Sub-Saharan Africans usually show greater range in measurements. First 30 Zulu males, 125 to 145. Table 2 compares populations, 30 skulls, with maximum skull breadth. Norse, Norwegian, 140.3. Zalivar, Hungarian, 141.1. Berg, Austrian, 149. Poundbury, Roman Britain, 50, 146. Tieta, Kenya, 129.8. Zulu, South African, 135.3. Gabon, West Africa, 41, 135.6. Dogon, Malian, 137.3. C Group, Nubian, 28, 135.3. First Dynasty, Abydos Egyptian, 54, 136.2. Gizeh, 26 to 30th Dynasty Egyptian, 138.7. Lachish, 700 BC Judah, 61, 138.5. En-Gedi, Hellenistic Judean, 35, 142.3. En-Gedi, Roman Judean, 25, 144.8. Safed, Palestine, 1500 BC, 7, 137. Safed, Palestine, Roman, 14, 133. The Safed measurements are from Tel Ahesi, Lachish by William Matthew Flinders Petrie, Cambridge University Press, 2013, reprint of early 20th century work, page 34. Nubian, Gabon, Abydos, Lachish, and Poundbury measurements are from Kieta, 1988, full reference in future chapter. This metric, measured trait, is good at separating sub-Saharan African from European population samples in the Howells database. The sub-Saharan upper limit from these samples is 137.3, while the European lower limit is 140.3. The Norwegians are from a dry climate, which makes the skull narrower than most cold-adapted populations. Hube et al., 2009, page 1732. Despite being from so far north, they are a good lower limit for cold-adapted populations. There is a difference of exactly 3 points, millimeters, between the European and African neighboring limits. C group Nubians are indistinguishable from sub-Saharan Africans in this measurement. First Dynasty Abydos Egyptians are also within this range, but Gizeh 26th to 30th Dynasty Egyptians are somewhat outside the range by 1.4 points and away from the European range by 1.6 points, millimeters. We could conclude, on this limited evidence, that late Lower Egyptians were 53.3% African and 46.6% European. 1.6 divided by 3 equals African component. 1.4 divided by 3 equals European component. It suggests cold-adapted intermixture took place between the 1st and 30th dynasty. Using the same principle, the Safed male skulls from the 18th dynasty Galilee, 1500 BC, are within the sub-Saharan African range, 129.8 through 137.3. The Lachish Judah male skulls, 138.5, lie outside the range by 1.2 points and away from the European range by 1.8 points. We could conclude, on this limited evidence, that the people of Lachish were 60% African and 40% European. The skulls from Hellenistic and Roman En-Gedi, on this limited evidence, would be firmly within the European range. It should be remembered that these estimates are based on the assumption that the Afro-type population concerned was like the Dogon and the Euro-type population was like the Norwegians in this measurement. These statistical amounts are intended to be guides only and not absolutes because they are only based on one trait. What we can say with more certainty is that on the basis of this trait alone, the Lachish sample was more African than European. One measurement, however, is likely to create this kind of uncertainty, which is why we shall proceed to use others. Horizontal circumference. The following table compares populations, males, 30, with horizontal circumference. Poundbury, Roman Britain, 61, 537.1. Gabon, West Africa, 41, 501.3. Badarian pre-dynastic Egypt, 22, 503.0. Tieta, 30, 508.7. Abydos, First Dynasty, 54, 511.28. Kerma, Nubian, 52, 513.7. Lachish, Judah, 700 BC, 516.8. All measurements from Kieta, 1988, page 383. We would expect a warm-adapted population to have a smaller head size than a cold-adapted population, following Bergman's rule. Horizontal circumference, or the distance around the head at the forehead, is a good measure of this. Because they are from further north, the Kerma Nubians are probably closer to the Afro-type involved than the more southerly Tieta or Gabon. We do not, however, have a Euro-type from further south than Britain. This will skew the proportions in favor of the African component, which would support the present author's theory, but we must put honesty and fairness before skewed support. In order to produce a more accurate picture of proportion, we shall use the Tieta measurement because they are from further south than the Afro population involved, just as the Roman Britons are from further north than the Eurotype population involved. There is a 28.4 point difference between the horizontal circumference of the Tieta, 508.7, and that of the Roman Britons, 537.1. Lachish is 8.1 points away from the Tieta as compared to 28.4 points away from the Roman Britons. This would make the Lachish people approximately 71.5% African and 28.5% European. This is assuming the Euro-type population involved was more like the Roman Britons and the Afro-type population was like the Nubians. Bioauricular breadth. Bioauricular breadth was the strongest indicator of climatic adaptation in the 2009 study earlier cited, Yu et al. 2009. In the following table, we show the average bioauricular breadths of samples from around the world as compared to those from ancient Palestine. This table compares population males, 30, with bioauricular breadth. Norse, Norwegian, 123.7. Zalivar, Hungarian, 123.5. Berg, Austrian, 129.2. Poundbury, Roman Britain, 50, 126.3. Andaman Islander, 110.3. Bushman, South African, 113.7. Zulu, South African, 116.3. Dogon, Malian, 115.8. Gabon, 41, 115.1. Tieta, Kenya, 117.5. Kerma, Nubian, 89, 118.2. C Group, Nubian, 20, 119.3. Abydos, First Dynasty Egyptian, 54, 119.6. Giza, 26 through 30th Dynasty Egypt, 118.3. Safed, 1500 BC Palestine, 7, 115. Safed, Roman Palestine, 14, 116. Lachish, Judah, 700 BC, 61, 119.2. The 18th Dynasty Palestinians and the Lachish Judah samples are within the range created by sub-Saharan African and Nubian measurements. This strongly suggests that they were warm and not cold-adapted. This specific trait does not suggest intermixture with cold-adapted populations. It also does not indicate this for late dynastic Lower Egyptians who had been mixing with Asiatics for well over 1,000 years. Perhaps this measurement only indicates whether one is more warm or cold-adapted, but does not indicate mixture so well. Lachish does not differ at all from the Nubians for this measurement. Bioauricular breadths were not available for Hellenistic and Roman period and Getty. The Roman period sample from Safed indicates Judeans were a warm-adapted population in contradiction to the maximum skull breadths of Roman period and Getty. Table 4b. First Australian, 118.9. Indigenous Tasmanian, 124.6. Tolai, New Britain, Melanesian, 120.2. Mokapu, Hawaiian Polynesian, 128.1. Easter Island, Polynesia, 123.8. South Morai, 18, 128.1. Guam, Micronesia, 130.3. North Japan, 124.6. Philippines, 124. Arikara Nation, North Dakota, 131. Peru, Native South Americans, 124.8. Inuit, 126.8. With the exception of indigenous Tasmanians, the Australo-Melanesians are differentiated from the Polynesians, Southeast Asians, and native North and South Americans. Bioauricular breadth separates the warm-adapted from the cold-adapted, even if they currently inhabit tropical and subtropical locations like the Philippines and Guam. The Tasmanians are the only black exception to the separation in the entire Howell's worldwide database. The exception can be explained by the fact that Tasmania has a temperate climate and the original inhabitants probably arrived at the same time as the first Australians. This was at least 50,000 years ago. This is enough time to develop aspects of a cold-adapted skull shape. Tasmanians looked like first Australians with afro hair. They became extinct in 1876 as a result of British colonial genocidal policies. Conclusion. Maximum skull breadth, horizontal circumference, and bioauricular breadth are measurements which separate Africans from Europeans in the Howell's worldwide database. They are identified as strong indicators of warm and cold adaptation by a worldwide study of 2009. All three indicate either a subtropically adapted Afro-type population in Safed and Lashish or a mixed population with a major Afro-type component. A reasonable inference, following Glauger's rule, would be that the people of Judah had heavily pigmented skins that complemented their subtropical adaptation. Bioauricular breath is the most efficient separator of warm-adapted populations from cold-adapted ones. All living groups in the Howells database with bioauricular breaths under 120 are either African or Australo-Melanesian. Their heavily pigmented skin is an obvious indicator of their warm adaptation. Such a powerful separator groups the people of 18th dynasty Safed, 7th century BC Lashish, and Roman period Safed with the warm-adapted peoples of this world. What forensic anthropologists say about skull shape. In the 19th century, two ecogeographical rules were proposed, hypothesizing that total body size within warm-blooded species would increase as temperatures fell, Bergman, 1847, while the size of body extremities would decrease, Allen, 1877. These ecogeographical rules are each consistent with fundamental thermodynamic principles and are based on the assumption that variation in the ratio of surface area, the site of heat loss, to body mass or volume, the site of heat production, allows adaptation to different thermal environments. Ecogeographical associations between climate and human body composition. Analyses based on anthropometry and skin folds by Jonathan C.K. Wells, AJPA 147, 2012, page 169. Thus, cephalic index is apparently correlated with climatic stress and follows the ecological rules of Allen and Bergman. It is generally expected that under cold stress the most advantageous head shape would be of a round type, brachycephalic, since this most closely approximates the spherical ideal. Under hot climatic conditions, a long head would be more advantageous. In reality, there are numerous exceptions to these expectations. Climate and Head Form in India by S. Bharati, S. Som, P. Bharati, T. S. Basuli in American Journal of Human Biology 13, 2001, page 626. Based on a sample of 339 populations, the magnitude of the index is statistically different between zones of predominantly dry heat, wet cold, and dry cold. It is argued that the occupation of cold climates is one of the circumstances increasing the frequency of brachycephaly through time. Head Form and Climatic Stress by Kenneth Beals in AJPA 37, 1972, page 85. Table 4 lists the FST values calculated for the entire set of craniometric measurements and for each variable separately. Only 3 neurocranial measurements showed high FST values and all reflect cranial breadth, XCB, XFB, and AUB. Climate signatures in the morphological differentiation of worldwide modern human populations by Mark Hube, Tsuneko Hanahara, and Katerina Harvati in the Anatomical Record 292, 2009, page 1724. In the actual table, bizygomatic breadth ZYB 0.4368 had a higher FST than maximum frontal breadth XFB 0.3182. XCB are the forensic symbols for maximum cranial breadth, XFB maximum frontal breadth, and AUB bioauricular breadth. FST is a measure of population differentiation with a genetic basis.